that night and in the crypt.
Go inside.
Many of us remember the werewolf stories from the 1930s, and Lon Chaney here in his depiction of the werewolf, his expression in his face, and especially the gypsy woman here who gives forth a prophecy. Let's look into this a little more.
You killed the wolf.
Well, there's no crime in that, is there?
The wolf was Baal.
You think I don't know the difference between a wolf and a man?
Baal became a wolf, and you killed him. A werewolf can be killed only with a silver bullet, or a silver knife, or a stick with a silver handle.
And he had a cane that had a silver handle upon it. Now this is part of the folklore that goes with this, is that it can only be killed by silver weapons, or of course later, once bullets are created, it has to be a silver bullet. Before bullets were created, though, this mythology goes way back, whether it's a silver bullet, where it becomes a silver weapon of choice, usually a dagger, something that's been enchanted or blessed, poured holy water on it and things like that. You take it farther back than that, and it goes all the way back to Mesopotamia, one of the earliest stories of mankind ever. It probably goes back way before that. But back in the Mesopotamian story of Gilgamesh, there's an evil priestess that wantonly wants a man. He rejects her, and she turns him into a wolf man, destined to walk the earth. The ancient stories of Rome are that the Romulus and Remus were brought up by a wolf. They were wolfen, right? So let's look into this prophecy here, though, and then I'll go into a little bit of a more of a in-depth discussion and a reveal on werewolfism.
You're insane. I tell you, I killed a wolf, a plain, ordinary wolf.
Take this charm, the pentagram, the sign of the wolf. It can break the evil spell.
Back in the day, you know that the pentagram is the sign, when you flip it upside down, is the sign of a wolf, right? It's that evil sign and symbol that's of that. That's a sign of a wolf. Now she's telling him that it's a sign of protection from wolves, that it's a good charm, a charm that keeps things away. And indeed, back to the Sumerians, they had these charms that they would put up, like the one I showed you about Pazuzu recently, and they used these charms for warding. They warded away evil spirits that were on the wind and things like that. They didn't know where they came from necessarily, and so they made up conjecture about it, and later we figured out something else.
Evil spell, pentagram, wolfbane. Oh, I'm sick of the whole thing. I'm gonna get out of here.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
Oh, quit it.
That's the famous prophecy that she gives, of course, that whoever's bitten by a werewolf becomes a werewolf himself. This also echoes in the vampire idea, where you can be bitten by a vampire. Now, in both these situations, you have to be bitten a second time to be fully turned, or they have to turn you just right, or nowadays in the modern vampire kissing movies and stuff, they have to really want to. They have to stop at the right time. All these certain type things they have to do that'll turn you. Otherwise, you're destined to do something weird. And a lot of the old mythology said that it would last for 40 days and go away, or 40 days and you would die. One of these two things is always written about them in both vampires and werewolves quite often. You see the 40-day thing a lot of times in vampires, and in werewolves, after the point that they know that you're turning into a werewolf, they tell you it lasts for a full moon, which is generally like 28 days, right? So somewhere around 10 to 12 days after being infected by a wolf, like he is, and she tells him that he will return and become a wolf himself, that he will have the same curse as the guy that he attacked, or the wolf that he had killed.
Handed me that. You're just wasting your time.
The wolf bit you, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
Wear this charm over your heart always.
All right, I'll take it. What do you?
Do
How
you
did
dare
it?
to show me the wound?
What?
Do you dare to show me the wound? Go now, and heaven help you.
And many of your old depictions always show you different werewolves, and more favored are ones like that, but original ones really had more of a humanistic appearance where they just had some type of wolfen thing, more hair, a lot of times a button nose would happen onto them, fangs, things along this line, and it wasn't really, evident. But things like, Frankenstein got nailed down real quick, zombies and things, but these werewolves are definitely a standout and a different creature, and they bring back something primordial, and it's a man, but it's a beast, and so it goes after. It's a man that's lost his mind. It's a somebody that's become rabid and freaked out, and you saw this in all these old ancient werewolves movies. They'd become hypersexual. They'd attack quite often women, things like that, and so what commonality do we have from this and the commonality of the time? I mean, it's, now looked at as being quite comical in things, but at one time this was something extremely serious, and people definitely believed in this situation. You would have men rampantly attacking people, and they would tell you stories, like how you can tell the difference between a werewolf and what they would keep away, and wolf's bane kept them away, and witches knew this, and they were respected for it before they started to be killed, by the way, and they knew ways to help cure the problem that had happened with wolves, like wolfen and the howling and stories like that, and then the gaze that's seen by vampires, the zombies, these half-dead people that somehow come back to life. Well, werewolves were never an undead type of creature, but it relates to that somewhat. Now, let's put this all together here somewhat as we see these strange werewolf depictions here that have been shown in movies for a long time. And howling right there was one of my favorites. Nowadays, of course, in the werewolf kissing movies, they just look like a giant regular wolf, but a lot of times they would have this wolfish guy appearance. In today's comical type things, they've lost all of their guts, and it ends up being where, hey, I can just play basketball a whole lot better, and people don't think it's cheating, and I don't know, it's just a farcical type thing, and we've taken it all the way through to now where it's really not seen much. And of course, the werewolf kissing movies they have and have had now for a while have really degenerated it. But if you remember the Howling movie that was set back in the 80s, it was quite terrifying and wicked. In fact, the final scene of which just raises your hair, because here they are trying to get out at the very end. He even shoots one through the window, and in the process, these guys going after him, she gets scratched. And so she's going to turn, and she ends up turning on TV and has him shoot her whenever she does turn. And they have people watching the TV, and they go, "What happened? What happened?" And they go, "Oh, she turned into a werewolf and he shot her." And then they just keep watching and eating popcorn and stuff. It's kind of the end of it, and rather comical. But let's look at this and how this goes together. And of course, vampires go in conjunction. In all these movies we saw, vampires and werewolves go conjunction. Quite often they're friends of each other's and things like that. Well, vampires can change into a lot of things. Now, werewolves turn into a dog or a wolf, right? And it's kind of a dog man or a wolf man. But a vampire can turn into a bat or a dog or a wolf, or they can turn into rats. And they also turn into a mist where you can't see them really at all. And they're become particles too small to see, something along that line, which is a strange concept. But whenever you look into it, and the idea that really came and sprung, or where it comes from now, looking back at it, it's fairly easy to see that there's a disease that you can get from this exact set of animals that we're talking about, and or they prey upon. It's called rabies. Rabies ruins the part of your cortex of your brain that keeps you to where your reasoning works correctly. You become agitated easily. You are easy to fight, and this is just in the beginning of things. You'll end up being, hypersexual and things like that. And so and of course it starts leading to foaming at the mouth and causing problems, and you're going to have a disheveled appearance and so on, and it just starts to go on from there. Now they have dementia somewhat. They're agitated. They're strangely hydrophobic, which is fear of water. They don't like the sounds of water running whenever you're in rabies and stuff. And a lot of people say that's because they can't swallow correctly and things, and it really drives them crazy. So little things can drive them crazy. Of course, this water thing leads to the holy water idea that you have for them too. And they also have aversions to sunlight. Now, there's this porphyria, also porphyria cutans, that makes people extremely susceptible to light and things, and it looks like that's probably a little bit more of a vampire, and the werewolf thing comes more from a rabies situation where rabid men go crazy, these wild men of the forest that ran around. I remember this change here. I've seen a deal on how they make this and how they had to go through all the trouble with it and everything. It's quite interesting to see how they pulled this off and how many days worth of shooting it took and everything for them to do so. But now again, so the linking it together, they can get rabies. Well, what gave you rabies back in the day? Well, rats can carry the fleas, right, that bit on people. In fact, we know about the plague. Okay, now you figure that in with the fact that bats definitely carry rabies, right? So do wolves and dogs, and it said that they do it by eating other rabid animals perhaps, and they get it from them. Well, how do they get it? Is it from eating them, or is it from perhaps the fleas getting onto them? Now you have this creature and the fleas get onto you, you don't know, and this ethereal mist of things changes you, and you're able to change. There's ancient stories in the 15, 16, 1700s of people that are supposedly in the middle of the night able to change into dogs and run around and attack people and rape people and stuff like that, and then they change back to normal during the regular day. Some stories tell you that they have to put their real clothes back on, that they go freak out, turn naked, run around acting crazy, and then when they put their clothes back on, they act normal, which is strange to say the least. Some of these transformations are quite comical. There's one just ripping out of his own skin. Quite often it's shown as being something very painful, and of course rabies is extremely painful to people too. Now, one other correlation with this, a lot of stories tell you that it'll last for 40 days, like I told you, and the 40 days possibility of infection and things along this line. Well, it's now known for sure that rabies, once infected, takes about 40 days to notice. If you didn't notice and you find out unnaturally, it's usually 10 to 12 days into it, and somewhere around 28 to 30 days are a full moon's worth of time, and it will kill you. You usually die somewhere around in 40 days, or you make it through it miraculously, but it does leave you hampered afterwards. And so this is the origin of all the beliefs that go along with it, and it has to do with rabies. And the original concept of it goes way back, again, like most things, from ancient Sumerian beliefs where they had the wolf and make it into it and everything. Anubis never hurt anything at all with the idea of him being a man-wolf looking creature in many of the depictions of ancient Egypt and things like that, where it looked pretty much something like this, carrying some type of Egyptian weapon, and there you go. And so you can see that, and also through all the Celtic ages and things like that, they had the same ideas, the same beliefs. There are Celtic stories about wolves that caused the great problem between all of these people, and one guy kills 7 wolves, and he has the other guy howl to come and help him, and kills 11 on his own, but then he's damaged by a wolf. But then whenever the other guy bites him, it cures him magically somehow and goes through this thing. They have these belts that they supposedly wear that allow them to shapeshift and turn into these things. And that reminds me of the belts of the Berserkers, who would wear animal skins and perhaps wolf skulls on their heads whenever they would attack. And then the stories of the people that went to fight them, like, oh, I don't know, Greece and Caesar, and then whenever they went to mess with the Celts and came back and said they ain't playing around at all, had a lot to do with this. This was one of the greatest scenes I remember from Werewolf in London, where you can see him come walking in, and this thing looked very much more like a bear wolf, man bear pig kind of concept, and not the same werewolf. So people have done a lot of variations on these, but the one thing that sticks with it a lot is, of course, this dog interpretation. And of course we know dogs get rabies and bring rabies. Dogs are wolves effectively. They carry the same type of fleas and problems. And I believe this is the origin and exasperation of the werewolf mythology, where it comes from, where it strengthened that. Now, of course, we have modern science, and nobody's ever willing to go, oh, that was just this. One interesting story in 1500s, early 1500s, 1520s, there was a man that was put in prison, or put in jail, for getting into a fight and acting, rabid. And they put him in jail, and he said that they had to let him go, got to let him go. And it was fixing to be a full moon. This is where a lot of this comes from. It's fixing to be a full moon, that he was crazy in his cell, and that even bent something in there that was cast iron, huge. It freaked them out. It took 5 men to subdue the guy again. Lord knows why they went in there to mess with him. He's just bending crap up. But they took all their stuff away from him. And it said over the next couple of days that his fingernails grew long, his hair grew long, and he acted like a freak. 3 or 4 days later, he seemed to be back to normal, and everything was okay. And a lot of people said this was probably alcoholism, and he was trying to withdraw, and all kinds of problems from that. It couldn't have probably been rabies that did this type of thing, but this also led to that idea of this man gone wild, rampant situation. And there's a little more to that story too, but we don't need to go into it, I don't believe. What we're really seeing here is, there's mystical wolf sight. You can see how they've changed a lot of these creatures. It's even in Harry Potter, and they give them some type of dignity in that show. And a lot of these, they show you some type of dignity to a man that has no control over what's happening to him, and he's trying to attain control. And again, I believe this really relates to the idea of rabies and having it attack you. And the other one is, of course, porphyra, which seems to have the same type of symptoms a lot, and possibly mimics vampirism a lot more. So, dunk! Like, share, and subscribe, guys, and enjoy the holidays here. But just relating to you where some of these monsters in our mythology come from. Peace.